Hey everyone, welcome to Broadband Deployment News. The Commerce Department has released some proposed waivers for the Buy American portion of the BEAD program. Be right back to take a look at that. Thanks for joining me. Rick Usey here with Zcorm with Broadband Deployment News. So this announcement came out. You see here, this is on the Internet for All site, but mentions here, following President Biden's State of the Union address in January, the NTIA announced that it would take a strict approach to enforcing the Build America, Buy American requirements for the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, or the BEAD program. It says now we're ready to provide more specifics. So there was something that came out it was a week or so ago, maybe less, that I reported on. That was some kind of preliminary guidance from not the Commerce Department, but I can't think of who it was now. But they came out with some preliminary guidance that was based around the same thing, but really more applied to all kinds of federal funding out of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So all kinds of infrastructure funding, those kinds of things. So that was, I reported on that, and that was preliminary. It was, they're going to be putting that document out. This is specifically for BEAD right now, is what we're looking at here. So what we've got for this, as you see here, as I scroll down, proposal, majority of fiber broadband equipment will need to be made in the U.S., including optical fiber, fiber optic cable, key electronics, and enclosures. So this is talking about making it here. It's not necessarily the Buy American provisions. This is more like the Build America stuff. So there are provisions for how much, the percentage of components that need to be in a particular piece of equipment or construction material, like fiber optic cable, where there are some waivers there, but it still needs to be, as we look through this, it's still going to have to be made in the United States. So the policies recommended in this draft waiver will ensure that close to 90% of BEAD funding spent on equipment will be spent on equipment manufactured in the United States. So again, manufactured in the United States, not necessarily all of the components being sourced out of the United States. There's a little thing here. Can't quite see all of that. I have that blown up. But you can see here, making internet for all in America. Again, close to 90% made here. Companies like Corning, CommScope, Prysmian, Nokia, Adtran have already announced new investments in broadband equipment, creating and reshoring hundreds of jobs, with more announcements on the way. Targeted waiver for chips and some electronics. So they've got these targeted waivers in there. See here, NTIA established criteria to prioritize products targeted for onshoring. Strategically important technologies like those that ensure the security, integrity, and reliability of network data should be produced in America. And this is what they were targeting. If a product's domestic manufacturing line can be scaled quickly, it should be produced in America. So if we don't have the resources or manufacturing right now, if it's something that could be brought online pretty quickly, they want to try to get that made here in America. And if a product like fiber optic cable, so critical to deploying high-speed internet networks in communities throughout the country, comprises a significant portion of the overall network spend, it should be produced in America, because it is so much of the spend. And we know we have facilities here that we can probably make this happen. And Nokia announced they're doing up in Kenosha, Wisconsin, they're doing a partnership there to be able to build their equipment here. And Corning and some others have announced that they are, they're building facilities and making use of what they can. So there are, however, limited circumstances where a non-availability waiver will be needed for certain pieces of broadband equipment. NTIA acknowledges that some chips may not be available in time to meet BEAD program construction timelines. So they proposed some of these waivers. Several companies already have announced plans to open or expand fiber optic cable and electronics manufacturing operations here in America. And again, I'll make that a little smaller for you. But so again, the announcement that was in Kenosha, Wisconsin with Nokia. Then you've got Adtran in Huntsville. Adtran's had manufacturing in Huntsville as long as I can remember. I used to sell printed circuit boards to Adtran when they were, when I was in the business back in the early 90s. I was selling printed circuit boards to Adtran for some of their electronics equipment back then. And so they've got the manufacturing there, although they're bringing some of that back. I think they're increasing capacity. They probably started offshoring stuff and bringing some of that onshore again. You've got some of these others. And then down here again, it says that This is, oh, here it is, more announcements coming soon, if you look at that there. That's that. I wanted to also look at the actual, close this thing here, look at the actual proposed document. So again, this is from the Department of Commerce. Limited general applicability non-availability waiver of the Buy America domestic content procurement preference is applied to recipients of BEAD. Notice request for comment. So this is what they're proposing. Now they're requesting comments, so there could be changes to this. And if this is something that impacts you, you should go ahead and let your voice be heard. The waiver incentivizes the domestic production of specific manufactured products based on strategic prioritization criteria, including network and data security, which will directly expand American job opportunities. So this is kind of reviewing the goals. Promotes broad participation in the BEAD program, ensures that BEAD program subrecipients will have access to the manufactured products necessary to fulfill their obligations under the program, allows funding recipients to to continue to provide economic opportunity through timely deployment of broadband infrastructure, which is recognized to expand job opportunities, and supports the timely development of critical domestic infrastructure that delivers broadband internet services to all Americans. Recipients to whom the waiver applies must report on their purchases of items from foreign sources as set forth below in this proposed waiver. Through this notice, NTIA seeks public comment on the proposed waiver. So they're balancing here the goals of BEAD, and we've got which is part of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So BEAD is designed to, number one, hopefully provide reliable broadband access to everybody in the country that wants it. And then secondly, as we're doing that, to create jobs, right? So it's the Creating Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So we want to make sure that we don't have impediments in the way that would prevent that. But we also, as I've mentioned before, it's very important that we manufacture as much in this country as we can because of the fact that it does produce jobs, and it is key to our national security, especially when we're talking about electronics and other things that are vital to our communications, kind of mission critical things, very important. So dates as far as this, the comment period for this waiver will be 30 days from the publication date of this notice, which was the other day. So commission comments must be received by September 21st. The Department of Commerce will determine whether to modify or finalize the proposed waiver after the comment period. So again, you can make your voice heard here, and they may make some changes based on that. The proposed waiver will, if granted, be effective for BEAD program awards obligated after the effective date of the final waiver for a period of 5 years. So that's how long it will be effective, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be that long. So they say here that the Department of Commerce will review this waiver no less than annually to assess whether it remains necessary. So for example, chips, which right now we really don't have the ability to produce in this country in the kind of quantity that we need, there are waivers on that, but it could be, because of the CHIPS Act and some focusing on that, very important, that 2 years from now we might. So they would make, I would think, adjustments to this at that point once there are sufficient quantities to maybe be able to procure that equipment, for example, here in the United States that has lots of chips in it. And obviously, there's going to be a big rush on equipment as internet service providers that are getting funds are starting to buy a lot of equipment, but then that's going to also settle down. So there'll be less demand at some point. Let's say within the 5-year period, there'll be less demand for certain things. Maybe fiber, for example, there'll be less demand for fiber as a lot of the fiber is deployed and, networks, at that point, the fiber's in the ground and you're having all the equipment, the OLTs, the ONTs, those kinds of things, then are more going to be needed at that point. There's some addresses here where you submit your comments. By the way, I linked to the press release or that announcement and then this document in the description of this video. So that's where you would send the comments to. I'd like to go over a couple of things in here. So Department of Commerce has the authority to waive the application of the Buy American preference when, number one, the application of that preference would be inconsistent with the public interest, and two, the materials and products subject to that preference are not produced in the U.S. at a sufficient and reasonably available quantity or satisfactory quantity and quality, or the inclusion of domestically produced materials and products subject to that preference would increase the cost of the overall project by more than 25%. So if we can make it here, but it's just too expensive or it increases the cost by 25%, then that's another thing that could account for a waiver. Then we've got here restrictions on use of items manufactured in China. That's pretty much going to be pretty well held to, unless it's just not possible. So BEAD program funds may not be used to purchase or support fiber optic cable and optical transmission equipment manufactured in the People's Republic of China, except that the Assistant Secretary may waive the application of this clause. However, the Assistant Secretary does not expect to issue such waivers. BEAD program, proposed limited general availability, non-availability waiver. NTIA and Department of Commerce initiated an assessment of the domestic supply chain for relevant manufactured products, construction materials, and iron or steel products during the lead up to the publication of the BEAD NOFO. So they've been looking into this for quite a while. The Department of Commerce proposes to find in its final waiver that certain items discussed below are not produced in the U.S. in sufficient and reasonably available quantities or a satisfactory quality that can fully comply with all requirements of the Buy America preference under BABA. And I don't think quality is going to be the main problem here in the U.S. I think the quality would be good. It's a matter of quantity. Findings, and of course, if you've got a manufacturing facility that doesn't have experience and they try to get it set up and suddenly they're trying to make chips, and you got to have a lot of controls in place if you're making chips. It needs a specialized facility. So there's certain things like that. Somebody can't just jump into the chip business right away and do it properly. Findings of industry assessment. So it talks about here how they came up with this. So Department of Commerce staff have held hundreds of meetings with large and small equipment manufacturers, ISPs, telecom companies, and many of the associations that represent these entities, among others. The initial industry assessment made clear that some construction materials and manufactured products required for broadband infrastructure deployments, as detailed further below, are presently not available in the quantity or quality needed. As far as the timeframes established by the IIJA. So again, this is related to when we need this stuff, and some of this could change in a year or two if it becomes available. Optical fiber and fiber optic cable. Optical fiber and fiber optic cables are likely to see the highest levels of expenditure. That's what you're going to have to buy to connect everybody up. While there is broad agreement across industry stakeholders that domestic production of optical fiber and fiber optic cable exists today, there's concern that there will not be sufficient supply. So again, there's a lot of it needed, even though we can make it here. So there can be some waivers there, again, depending on how long that's the case. We do have folks like Corning and others that say they're going to be manufacturing here in the U.S., but can they keep up with all of the demand is the question. Department of Commerce therefore proposes to waive the Buy American preference for non-optic glass inputs. That would be an overclad cylinder, for example, which are used as an input to the preform manufacturing process of optical fiber, a construction material that will be used in BEAD program projects. So they still want stuff manufactured here, but fiber optic cable is one of those things where it's a construction material, but it's also something that's manufactured. So it's kind of crosses that. Other construction materials, NTIA's research indicates there's no need for a waiver of the Buy American preference for other construction materials. So it doesn't specify what, but it's saying fiber optic is one that there is a need. Electronics are likely to be the second largest segment of equipment used in BEAD fiber broadband deployments. Things like ONTs and ONUs, that would be the CPE that would be at the customer prem, either on the side of the house or on the wall in their house, that kind of thing. The fiber, basically that fiber goes into that, and then generally it's Ethernet coming out of that. ONTs and ONUs, that's what that would be. OLTs, that would be the access piece that the ONTs and ONUs connect to. That's either in the central office or in the field in a remote OLT kind of deployment out maybe in a hardened pad, that kind of thing. OLT line cards, optic pluggables, routers, switches, optical amplifiers, and power systems. These electronics and compatible electronics used in fixed wireless and other types of broadband network deployments, as well as antennas and antenna arrays are almost uniformly manufactured in Southeast Asia. So they're talking about that. Fixed wireless, for example, is going to be impacted. Semiconductors, that's the big one. Semiconductors represent the majority of the value of the components that make up such products, often in excess of 70%. Almost all these chips are currently manufactured outside the U.S. So It mentions here the CHIPS Act, and that's going to have hopefully a significant and positive impact. But again, it takes time to get that in place. As I mentioned, you don't just take a current manufacturing facility and turn it into a chip manufacturing facility. There's all kinds of specialized equipment. It's got to be pristine clean. You got to have these clean rooms where, as you make these things, because of the circuitry is so small, you can't have any dust, those kinds of things. So it's a difficult manufacturing process. So mentions that, but mentions that because of the timeline, that the CHIPS Act will probably not have the impact right away that is needed. Department of Commerce, therefore, proposes to waive the Buy American preference for all electronics and BEAD program projects, with the exception of 4 categories of electronics. To waive only let's say for the 4 categories of electronics, they propose to waive only the 55% cost of components test and to provide specific guidance regarding the manufacturing processes that must occur in the U.S. for the waiver to be applicable. So again, if you can't get the components here, they still want to make sure that stuff's built here. Enclosures, pedestals, terminals, and fiber distribution frames. For example, domestic producers frequently rely on inputs that are not currently produced in sufficient quantities in the U.S. and are unlikely to be so in the near to midterm. So this, again, is another thing that in 3 or 4 years they may take away this waiver. Department of Commerce, therefore, proposes a limited waiver of the 55% cost of a components requirement for enclosures used in BEAD. Other network equipment, for example, splitter modules, and ancillaries like vaults, conduit, lashing wire, mounting brackets, attenuators, and patch panels, they make up a small percentage of network expenditures. There is some domestic production capacity. To the extent that there are classes or categories of other network equipment used in broadband network deployments that are not domestically available, NTIA expects that the department's public interest waiver of Buy America preference for de minimis infrastructure project purchases will be sufficient for most projects. De minimis is something where if these particular things that they're talking about here, like mounting brackets, for example, a particular component is, I believe it's 5% or less of the project cost, up to $1 million. So you could have $1 million in brackets, I guess. If it's over that, it would not be de minimis. But if it's 5% or less, or if the project itself is only $250,000 or less, then it can fall under that de minimis. So these may have a waiver just under that de minimis factor. Iron or steel products, radio towers used in terrestrial fixed wireless deployments would be a key factor there. NTIA's research indicates that there is no need for a waiver of Buy American preferences on that. Apparently we're good there. Proposed waiver, scope of waiver, construction materials. So they're talking about now the scope of the waiver on the construction materials. They propose to waive the Buy American preference for non-optic glass inputs. And again, this is, for example, the overclad. Some of this is repetitive. They say we propose all optic glass used in the manufacturing of optical fiber and fiber optic cable must meet the following standard for glass. All manufacturing processes from initial batching and melting of raw materials through annealing, cooling, and cutting occurred in the United States. So again, even if we can't get everything here, they want to make sure that it's put together or manufactured here. Fiber optic cable, including drop cable, all of the manufacturing processes for that. Optical fiber, all the manufacturing processes for that. Electronics, for these 4 categories of electronics, NTI proposes to waive the 55% cost of components test. So optical line terminals and remote optical line terminals. So OLTs and remote OLTs, again, that's the equipment that's in the central office or out in the field somewhere connecting the CPE. OLTs and ROLTs that support EPON, GPON, XGS-PON, 25GS-PON, point-to-point Ethernet, and G.fast technologies. G.fast is a DSL technology. It is pretty fast. It can over 100 meg per second, up to a gig, I believe. But short distances, I think 500 yards, 500 feet, can't remember. But in any event, it's something that might be applied to, for example, an MDU. You might have DSL and MDU, and you could do G.fast and provide fast speeds there. For MDUs, by the way, also, a great option is G.hn, which if you've got twisted pair in the building or coax, you can run fiber to the building, and then you've got a device access concentrator, G.hn, where the fiber comes in and then that gets distributed over the existing wire in the facility, in the MDU. So you don't need to run wiring. If you don't have to do DSL in there, you can run G.hn, again, right over the twisted pair or the the coax, and then you've got just in each unit that wants it, you've got a little CPE device that goes in there, and you can get up to gigabit speeds on that. The following manufacturing processes at a minimum must be concluded entirely within the U.S. Printed circuit boards. Printed circuit board assembly is required. I was, in a previous life, I worked for a printed circuit board manufacturer here in the Atlanta area that is no longer around. There still are, though, PCB manufacturers in this country. That is kind of a larger scale of the chip manufacturing. There's still a lot that goes into PCB manufacturing. It would be hard to set one up from scratch. So you certainly could do it. It'd be easier than a chip manufacturing. But you're doing a lot of the same things on a larger scale. You've got circuitry that needs to be etched, and you've got all these processes. You got layers. You could have circuit boards that have, usually the old circuit boards had one side or two-sided. Now they got layers of, 10, 20, even more layers of circuits with going through these boards. So those are really hard to manufacture, but that needs to be done here in the U.S. OLT line cards, that would be the PCBs, same things here, the PCB, printed circuit board assembly. I didn't mention same things, those line card assembly, software integration, firmware, chassis assembly, testing and quality assurance, and packaging and shipping. Same thing here for the PCBs. Excuse me, this is the OLTs, and right? Yeah, OLTs and ROLTs. So this would be for those, and then you've got the PCBs and other material in there. Then you've got optical pluggables. That would be your optical subassembly installation and closure, software integration, testing and quality assurance, and packing and shipping. So packaging and shipping, all here in the U.S. So basically, you receive all of your parts. It doesn't matter if the components are more than 55% of the cost, as long as you're sourcing that and putting it together here in the United States. ONTs and ONUs. So these would be the customer premises equipment. Same thing here, printed circuit boards, software and integration, chassis and assembly, testing and quality assurance, and packaging and shipping, all that stuff here in the U.S. Enclosures, that would be the manufacturing of the metal or plastic parts, for example, by machining or injection molding, and assembly of the parts of the final manufactured product. That needs to be done here. Additional proposed requirements, there's the de minimis waiver that I talked about. Buy America self-certification. Some people were concerned that some folks would say their stuff was from here in the U.S., but it was not. You see here falsely claiming BABA compliance. So the NTIA says that they propose to publish and maintain on the NTIA website a list of manufacturers and their manufacturers' individual products that are an officer of the company has certified that they're Buy American BABA, subject to fine or imprisonment. So that should be enough for companies not to lie about that. Reporting requirements, the Department of Commerce proposes to have BEAD program recipients to whom the proposed waiver would apply report their purchases of items from foreign sources. So they're saying this is partly to kind of keep track of what's going on. They want to know how things are going. You see here, this will help. They'll use this information to better understand the market and availability of U.S. products in the supply chain to inform its implementation of the BEAD program, as well as other broadband infrastructure deployment programs. They will publish additional BABA reporting and compliance requirements in separate guidance. I think that was it. Yeah. So again, this kind of goes along with what was published the other day, those preliminary rules. But this is right now, they're not saying it's preliminary, but it is, because they've issued these proposed waivers, but they're seeking comments. So again, you can certainly make your voice heard if this is something that impacts you, if you're a manufacturer, for example, or an ISP that you want them to know about your challenges, those kinds of things. You can do that through this. So thanks for joining me today. This is good news, by the way. So, it's good that they're finalizing the stuff, that they're open to these issues and are willing to do these waivers. And this will certainly help those subgrantees that are going to be getting funds. Again, one of the biggest challenges is the amount of fiber construction, deployment that's all going to be taking place at the same time. So all of the fiber that's going to be purchased at the same time, all those deployments get started. Everybody's going to start needing equipment, the OLTs and the ONTs about the same time, the enclosures, all of that stuff. There's going to be a big demand. whatever we can build here in this country, it's going to make a big impact. It's going to be great for the economy. It's going to be great for getting people back to work if we can get it built in this country. But if we can't, we want to make sure that it does not extend the amount of time that it's going to take to get broadband deployed to everybody, because we want to get that finished as soon as possible. So thanks for joining me. If this was interesting or helpful, if you give me a like on the video, I'd appreciate it. If you have not subscribed to our channel, click the subscribe button. You'll see a little red thing down there on the video itself, not here on the right side of my screen, because that doesn't work. Just a little button on the video, or go below YouTube and you can click it there, and then click the little bell to be notified when I am live. Thanks a lot, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.